Good afternoon and welcome everybody to another webinar in our virtual event series at Donor Drive. I am Dan Shabazi. I'm Director of Strategic Partnerships here at Donor Drive, and I'm also going to be introducing our speaking guests of the day at Firefly Partners. But before that, just a few housekeeping reminders. We are recording today's webinar. And so you will receive the recording after the session is over. We'll also do a Q&A toward the end. So feel free to drop any questions you have in the chat as we go, and we'll select as many as we can to answer, provided the time that we have remaining. Also, just a quick reminder, please take the post-webinar survey. We really want to know your thoughts so we can make these webinars better as we go forward. And because, as I mentioned, this is a series, if you missed any of our previous Building Virtual Events webinars, you can go back and watch any of those in our resources section on donordrive.com as you wish. And so for now, I'd like to introduce you to a few folks at Firefly Partners. Terry Shanklin, who is their VP of Growth, and Jen Frazier, who is President and Founder of Firefly Partners. Taylor, I'll hand it off to you.
Hi, sure thing. Thanks, Dan. Thanks so much for having us. We're excited to talk about this topic and continue to see things unravel, over the course of this year, and really think through how we can best address, continuing to run our events, empower our events, empower human connection, even in this virtual world. So thanks, Donor Drive, for having us on today. I am Taylor Shanklin. I'm the VP of Growth here at Firefly Partners, and I've been working in the peer-to-peer technology and event fundraising space since about 2007. I've been doing this for quite a while in a different capacity, but always in a digital capacity. And one of my mottos, just in everything when I think about using a new tool or thinking about how to market while using that tool, is really to focus on how to minimize the disconnect that can happen in the digital world to really maximize results and empower connections. And so that's a little bit about me, and I'll pass it over real quick for an intro from my partner in crime here today, Jen.
Thanks, Taylor. Hi, everyone. Great to be here. I'm Jen Frazier. I'm the president and founder of Firefly Partners. And so before I founded Firefly in 2007, I spent almost a decade working at National Planned Parenthood out of the DC area and the New York area, doing digital advocacy, digital organizing, just all sorts of digital as it sort of came online in the early 2000s, and sort of watched major transformations happen there and kind of pushed some of that innovation and thinking into Firefly. When we started, we've been a virtual company since day one, and so that's been really nice. In the more current transition, we didn't have really much of a transition to come to running the company in a virtual space during COVID, so that has been great for us. But our team is across the country. We work exclusively with nonprofits and digital work, so lots of fundraising, advocacy, communications, websites, all sorts of things, social. So today we're excited to talk more about the technology in this kind of disconnected space, how we can use the tech to help be creating more of these more human connections, and really try to build in some of that personalization and personal connections, even in our kind of disconnected spaces. So, and how we talk about taking those events and making them virtual, and how to sort of set them up properly and measure successful outcomes, so everyone can sort of try to stay on track with their fundraising outcomes for the year in a really challenging and difficult space. So happy to be here. Taylor's going to walk us through the first part. Hand the microphone back to you, babe.
All right. Hey, thanks. And Jen and I, we host a podcast called the Nonprofit Razzle Dazzle. So our nickname, she's Razzle and I'm Dazzle, and we try. We'll hopefully razzle dazzle your world today when we talk about virtual events. Let's keep this interactive, folks. So Dan, if questions come in, feel free to ping those questions over to Jen and I, and we'll have an open Q&A at the end. We like to keep things interactive and helpful, as helpful as we can be. So let's talk a little bit. Jen mentioned this. We're going to talk a little bit first, getting started with really how to think about measuring success in a virtual world, because it's a little bit different, right? And so how can you set goals? How can you choose the right tools? And how can you measure outcomes? And then we're going to get into the second half of this to really talk today about, like, what does it look like in terms of actually making it happen, from configuration of your event, like what things do you need to consider, to messaging your event, because obviously messaging needs to be a little bit different than it was before. If you had something that was in person before and now you're pivoting over to having a virtual event, like, messaging is a little bit different. And we're going to talk about some pillars of good messaging. And then lastly, one of the biggest pieces, I think, in terms of having a successful virtual event is that ongoing motivation and engagement factor. So we'll give you some examples and tips and ways to think about doing that. So let's talk a little bit first, when we think about determining what success looks like, let's just talk about the fact that, like, it is going to be different, right? And so I think when we accept that, okay, maybe we had a run or a bike ride or a gala or any kind of, like, in-person event happening where people came out and all of our marketing culminated to one big day and people were going to show up and have that day. And now it's like we're connecting with them on their phones and on their computer screens and in a totally different way. And so I just want to talk a little bit and open up the conversation today with that context. Like, that's why we're here and that's what we're talking about. And I think the exciting thing for, the Donor Drive team and our team is we have been working in digital for a long time. And now it's interesting to see how it continues to evolve as we make the shift from a lot of events that used to happen in person into the digital space and get into live streaming and all of these different things that you can do. I think there's a lot of opportunity. While it's different and while the change is scary, there's also a lot of really exciting opportunity with it. So I want to talk a little bit first about the fact that, again, we're now needing to reach people and touch people on the other side of a computer screen, or on the other side of a tablet, or on the other side of a cell phone. And just like you're living in this world today, where maybe you feel like you're just super hyper connected all of the time. I don't know about you, but sometimes it feels like you can't shut the screen off. Our supporters are living in that world too. And so when we think about that, we need to think about when we are reaching out to them and we're touching them through our virtual event experience, they're a lot like us in, the day-to-day of their world right now. And I think that that's really important to take a step back and, like, remind ourselves of that just like you might be feeling a little bit almost over-connected, they could be feeling that way too. And so I think there's some things to really think about to make sure you have success when you're reaching people on the other side of a screen. I think a lot of people, and you might be grappling with this yourself, is, it can feel like a virtual event is disconnected. Like, it just feels like, well, it's just going to feel so transactional. And one of the major things that people got out of our personal, in-person event in the past was that you go and you see everyone and you have this human connection, right? So we want to talk today about the fact that we understand that can happen, where people can feel disconnected in the virtual setting. They can feel like, well, if we do this thing virtually, we're not really going to touch people in the way that we are. But your supporters are not transactions, right? Like, and digital actually can really empower human connection. And so it's really just about using it in the right way. And as you're planning your virtual event, asking the right questions and having the right conversations in your organization so that those beautiful, amazing humans who show up online, right, who log in maybe to your YouTube live stream, or your Twitch stream, or your Facebook stream, are there and connecting with you in a way that people connected with you in person before. So that's a little bit about what we're going to talk about today, the process of creating those digital touch points and getting the most success out of your event. So how do we do that, Jen? I'm going to pass it over to you. You've been building a lot of virtual events, actually for a long time, even pre-COVID. So let's talk through and hear from you on how to make it happen.
Thanks, Taylor. So really, there's a lot of different elements that come into making a successful virtual event. So go to the next slide. So we're going to kind of set this stage where we don't want to be the Kevin Costner. I mean, I personally don't ever want to be Kevin Costner, but this idea that I feel like we struggle a lot with our clients where it's like, okay, we're going to build this thing and hopefully people will show up. But obviously we know that even in an in-person, especially now that it's virtual, what does it mean for people to come? And then you can't just build it and expect people to magically appear at your event and be excited about participating, even more so in the virtual space. Like it could have been like, oh, people can't wait to come and do that run. They've been training, they're going to come and it's going to be exciting, or they're going to come to that gala and see all the fun stuff. How do we now make sure that when we build the right event, we have the right tools, we configure it properly? How can we also make sure that they show up and we're kind of thinking about our success outcomes a little bit differently now that it's virtual? So don't just assume that you can build it and then they will just show up. So typically when we talk clients through a path for really any project, we kind of follow the same roadmap. You do want to do a lot of initial discovery thinking and then thinking about how is it going to be different in the virtual space. So thinking about what are those outcomes, and we'll talk about that, how it's a little bit different in a virtual space than it is in a traditional in-person. Then you want to sort of configure and design it properly to maximize the process and sort of the experiences for your participants along the way, reaching towards those hopeful outcomes and those goals. Obviously, they want to spend time configuring, developing it properly, testing it, always test. Then you want to sort of make sure your team is trained. If you're trying to use some new tools in this virtual space, take the time to do it properly, really try to make sure everyone is trained properly, knows how to do it, and is not rushing through just to sort of get out the door in advance of a virtual date. Obviously, you want to kind of make a big deal about the launch and pushing out of like the new tool, the registration pages and things like that are open. But even once things are live, give yourself the opportunity and really build in that process of kind of coming back and evaluating how it's going and potentially optimizing or tweaking an event, not just between one event and the next event you might do, but even in that sort of mid-event process. So even when you've set some goals and you're starting to measure even along the way, kind of have it in your mind that it's not a create, set, launch, and forget, or kind of only look at it after the event. It's really important to think about how you're analyzing and looking at things along the way, especially in a virtual space where oftentimes it's not just, oh, we're going to fundraise and then we're going to have this big event, at some point in the future. A lot of times virtual events have changed to stretching out the participation over a longer period of time. So that sort of tweaking and optimizing, even in that sort of ongoing space, is probably almost more critical in a virtual event space than it is in an in-person space. So those are kind of the major steps we try to walk through with folks and that you should be considering of your roadmap while you're thinking about the various steps of your event. So next slide. So one of the most important things you can do is thinking about a virtual event is setting goals and thinking about how you're going to measure against those goals. So obviously virtual is going to be different, as we've said a couple times, and everybody understands, but it is, again, thinking about what kind of experiences do I want to set up for my participants in this space. And one of the most important things you can think about is that your participants are now going to be coming from potentially a much wider geographic area. So you need to think about, oh, right, I've got completely different kinds of goals, because I'm not talking about a localized area being able to come to a specific location and participate in that event. And then maybe there's obviously fundraising. Fundraising that happened that would have been around like the participants coming to the particular event. Now your participants can be geographically dispersed. You can be anywhere. And so thinking about the goals, you want to think about, okay, now I'm expanding my potential reach. I'm expanding my potential audiences that are coming in. So I need to be real clear about what my goals are and what my potential outcomes can be. So we use at Firefly a system of organizing ourselves and setting goals called the entrepreneurial operating system, or EOS. and they help us sort of stay focused as you're leading up to an event and evaluating it, and then doing ongoing engagement with something after. But you can use any sort of system that you need to sort of help you stay focused on setting the goals, thinking about how you're going to track them, and then what are you thinking about in terms of your ongoing engagement and ongoing benchmarks for success for your event. So certainly the biggest kind of markers are taking a look at what you consider to be outcomes that are going to be successful for you. So again, what's going to change? What's going to be different? What are going to be similar elements maybe as what you would have had for an in-person, but what is going to be really different? Again, some of your geographic elements are going to be different. Some of your participation milestones might be different. Some of the ways you're helping people engage, again, over a longer period of time are going to be different. So you want to think about different timelines for yourself and your team about when you need to get certain things done. And so make sure your timeline is appropriately set. So like, oh gosh, I need to think about getting stuff done beforehand in a different way, because it's not now all about that one day. Typically now we're seeing people have events are spread out a little bit more or leading up to a day. So there are multiple touch points along the way. So you need to think about your timeline in a much more elongated space there. And in not just leading up to the event, but after, sort of the ongoing engagement factors as well. So make sure everybody has proper ownership over the pieces, you're setting those goals appropriately, and you're thinking about how can I make sure my team is thinking about the event holistically enough to make sure that when you're setting those kind of goals and milestones for yourselves, you have proper assignment and roles, responsibilities, and accountability for making sure you're setting up the event and thinking about it from a much longer arc, I think, than we've seen in in-person events specifically. So maybe next slide. So one thing you might be considering in a virtual pivot is, do I have the right tool set? Am I using the right tools that are going to be successful in a virtual capacity? Do I need to incorporate other tools into my toolbox that might be a good add-on, such as like Donor Drive Suite? I think if you've been using it or you're thinking about using it, they have really great integrations with some live streaming. And I think sometimes live streaming opportunities sometimes in this new virtual space kind of sometimes feel a little daunting to folks, but it's like something to consider and something to evaluate and something to look at as you're considering the right elements that might come into a virtual event. So when you think about sort of what might happen in a virtual event, I think, again, you might want to think about maybe I'm going to have some pre-recorded content. Maybe I'm going to have some live streaming sections that day. Maybe I'm going to have opportunities to engage with different participants in different ways that day, or maybe I'm going to get pre-recorded content from folks that are in some of these varied locations. You need to think about all those elements so you're making sure that you're having the right tools that can enable you to pull off that event successfully. And so you kind of think like, what do I really want to have? What are the elements I need that day? And make sure like, gosh, maybe I want to do that in event number 2. Maybe I don't want to I don't want to bite off all that for my first event, but really think about the tools you have. Sometimes all the tools you need are like a Zoom and, active, folks who can be engaged, who script out the day for you and can work really well over a few hours of a live event, and you don't need pre-recorded content. A pre-recorded content is also a nice way to let sponsors participate in a way that they maybe would have at the in-person. So again, you just really want to think about all the different ways you're going to use the space of the day of versus leading up to, and making sure that the tools themselves, as you can see, some of the questions we have listed here are things for you to kind of think through and analyze for yourself in terms of what those outcomes you've earlier identified or what your goals are for the event. Are the tools that you have going to help you get there or help you measure outcomes around those goals? So that's really the key to thinking about tools. And I know that when folks are thinking about pivoting to a virtual event, pivoting to new tools at the same time sometimes feels daunting, but it doesn't have to be. A lot of the folks like the Donor Drive team and us, we can help you make that transition pretty quickly, pretty seamlessly. So I would say, take a quick, hard look at the tools you currently have and make sure, are they going to be the right ones to help me reach those goals and outcomes I had thought of? And if not, it's time to maybe take a quick look in advance again of that timeline when that sets in. Can I make a pivot to a new tool system? Not critical, not essential, but certainly something to consider to help you make sure you're able to reach those outcomes most effectively.
Yeah, and I'll tack on to that. I think one of the things that's interesting too about thinking through taking an in-person event and making it virtual, or even just rethinking that whole event in the virtual world, is that there's a lot of flexibility. I think, you know, even in thinking like something like live streaming, people ask us, well, what is live streaming? And, you know, people often think about it as, you know, gaming only. But I think with live streaming and with capabilities, with tools like what Donor Drive can do and other systems, is you can actually get really creative in the virtual world. You know, people live stream cooking shows on Twitch. And so there's actually like a whole lot you can do. And when you're assessing tools and the right platforms to do what you want your event to be, like, get creative, you know, think about what you really want the experience to be in the virtual world, and then you can align the tools to get you there and to create that experience.
Yeah, and I think the last piece here is just when you're looking at tools is once you've kind of created that sense of what that event's going to be and the outcomes you're shooting for, make sure the tools that kind of bullet in the middle there have the right reporting built in to get you the metrics to kind of measure that success of all those different elements appropriately. Because I think that's one of the things that we've seen some struggling with, like, well, it's kind of hard to know, like, you know, maybe there's how engaged are people? What are people doing? Is it, how much should I expect them to be participating in advance? How much on the day of? Make sure that you get the reporting. If it's multi-location because it's virtual and you're trying to kind of bring in different things, can I get the right reporting? And do I need to report in an ongoing way? Do I want to include like elements that day? So do I need to make sure that the reporting can give me almost a feed of activity that's happening that day? Just think about what you want that experience to look like, and that the tools align to make sure that you're measuring your outcomes appropriately and kind of measure the success of the event accordingly. So I think that's good there.
Absolutely. Yeah. And that takes us to the next slide, Jen.
Yeah, so again, speaking back to some of these outcomes and goals, like, so some specifics we would, you know, encourage folks to be thinking about is obviously the participation, you know, the registrants from the different places. What sort of engagement factors are you seeing along the way? So not just, you know, how many people are signing up at a given moment, but then if they've signed up, as everyone knows, leading up to a particular event, about the engagement that you're seeing from participants leading up to either, you know, again, traditionally that day of, but that, like, are people responding to your posts? Are they liking? Are they commenting? Are they commenting back? Are they making their own posts? Are they sharing? Are they doing their fundraising along the way? If you're asking people to, you know, take that 5K or that triathlon virtually, and they're supposed to sort of do their physical events sort of over a period of time, how much is that actually happening? Do you know, how much can you encourage and get people poured out on their success to date leading up to maybe that big in virtual celebration day, those types of things? How much of that fundraising is happening? Are they doing it themselves? I mean, how much of their audiences are participating in a fundraising opportunity? And then obviously for you as an organization, this is a huge opportunity to grow your various social channels, and the growth along those channels, I think, is a really important factor for you to measure. Again, it's that measuring along the way, those engagement factors along the way, and not just on that day of. So you're thinking about how engaged are folks on my various social channels. Obviously, that's a lot about, again, trying to delegate proper roles to folks on your team, monitoring, posting, commenting back, engaging from your side to your participants to encourage that level of participation and engagement along the way, kind of leading up to generally that day of, that big virtual event day of. But there are a lot of different factors. It's not just about sort of fundraising and coming up to that day of. Right now, your social channels are going to be your major kind of indicator of engagement. And then you can build in other ways to make sure that your participants are engaging along the way, kind of those like milestones leading up to the day of, and sort of go, great, tell us, you know, report in on your success or your progress to date on either your fundraising or you're tracking, you know, how much you're doing maybe some of those other physical events in the meantime leading up to that day of, or if it's another sort of fun event that you're doing, just trying to think of creative ways to help your participants sort of check in and have an engagement moment along the way to make sure that they're all kind of building excitement and enthusiasm up to that day of in a different way, so that they have almost something extra to participate in that on that virtual day of, but don't neglect those kind of milestones leading up to and the opportunity to engage with your folks along the way. I don't know if Taylor, if you have anything else to add on this one.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think it's a little bit more of it's always an ongoing engagement, strategy that we like to put in place with our clients, even when we're thinking about in person. But with virtual, you want to think even a little bit more about that, right? Because again, you're trying to get people to connect with you on an ongoing basis oftentimes, and you might want to get people to kind of connect and engage before the event and then log in one day and maybe watch some pre-recorded videos or some live videos. And then you might want to look for ways to extend that beyond. So as you're thinking about your goals and what you want to measure, I think thinking about that engagement and those engagement metrics and participation milestones, and we'll show some examples of ways to do this, is really important to kind of think and plan out as you're planning the event and the pivot to the virtual space.
All right.
So let's talk a little bit, and Jen, we're going to get into, okay, how do you do that now, right?
Right. So obviously we kind of think about these are 3 major steps, and obviously the last critical step that we'll talk about a little bit more is sort of that measuring, but we'll kind of jump through some of this configuring, making sure, again, like if you had to choose new tools, just some different things to think about. And then Taylor's going to jump back in and talk about the messaging and the motivating, and then some of the measurement opportunities. So we can keep going. So really quickly, some of the things you might want to think about, again, sort of different types for your participants along the way. Again, like traditionally, you might have had different participation types for folks coming to your in-person. Now you can, again, can expand that. I think, you get really creative in different ways you can engage people in kind of this virtual setting. Again, I think that we've seen people really fun and different and interesting things along the way right now in a virtual space. Again, like you might just have the opportunity to live stream, people doing something totally different or random, like a cooking show or things like that. And it's sort of like, you don't have to do that, like try to take your in-person event and try to make it virtual. I think, again, right now there are different types of ways to get people to participate that are completely different and completely just out of the box. Case with you. So think about different ways to engage people differently. Obviously, your fundraising goals. Get the question a lot, like how much different, how different should my fundraising goals be set in a virtual setting than in my in-person setting? And right now, it's kind of a big unknown. I mean, we've got people who are saying definitely they're raising, again, some folks are raising tons still in a virtual space, but that's typically folks who've been doing virtual for a while are now seeing even more success in this space. Folks that are transitioning for the first time into virtual, I think some people have seen maybe a slight, decrease in the fundraising that they've been able to raise versus an in-person event. But I would say still set the goal high. I mean, really motivate your supporters. And now that you kind of have this expanded universe, think about your fundraising goals. Like, I have actually way more people that could participate and fundraise for me in this virtual space than I would have traditionally as a defined geographic area. So I wouldn't necessarily say shoot low, but be realistic in that it's probably going to be slightly down from your in-person, but don't try to set it too low so you're not motivating people properly to still fundraise and still give. So kind of come down maybe a little 10-20% maybe from your traditional in-person, but still feel like it's significant and it will be a stretch, and then you need to continue to motivate, which we'll talk about again. So again, you're going to drive that engagement, you're going to keep the fundraising goal set relatively high, and you're going to continue to motivate in a more dispersed way again than you would have just your localized event before. And one thing that we're really seeing as being successful for folks is the gamification aspect of it in a virtual setting. And I know that some folks have seen, like, you know, kind of the Twitch integrations and thinking about live streaming and gaming and how can I incorporate that into my fundraising, and so making it really gaming and really gamify it. You can do that. You can also just come up with fun ways to gamify with maybe like participation level badges, or ways to gain everyone else shout out, like somebody's reached a milestone that we want to be proud of. They want to be able to do a little leaderboards and things like that, and make it sort of a little more gamified, and that just makes the kind of the competition aspects of it kind of ramp up. So I think that's a fun way to do it. And again, certainly just thinking about how you are really, really integrating your social channels. Like before, you might have been like, oh, it's nice to have, and maybe that'll be a good way to help, you know, my participants do that. Social channels are critical in a virtual setting. So you want to make sure that you've got, again, back to that tool selection, making sure that your social channels are fully integrated into your fundraising platform and your event platform right now is critical. So you can kind of make sure that people are able to share and post and repost, and all of your participants are able to sort of help that. And then often things are really nice is to show that like a space where people can come in and see the participation happening from all over the place. And so when you're able to integrate your social channels properly, any participant can come in and see, oh, great, Albuquerque's doing this, and New York's doing this, and San Francisco's doing this. And that just really helps people really feel that participation in an event and feel like that connection that we're talking about, and that collaborative experience, and not just feel like, I'm over here doing my fundraising, and it feels very isolated. Your social channels and your social feeds back into your event space can really help make that community aspect real and tangible for folks. So that's a critical part of the configuring space. So we have a couple of examples. So we have helped our folks, our friends at Living Beyond Breast Cancer, do some configuring and pivoting an event that they had, like these in-person yoga events, as you can see. They had to pivot it to virtual, and just some of the things that they did to help, you know, we helped them sort of configure and think about a transition to virtual was a little bit more. They've always had a thermometer. They wanted to keep that, you know, front and center for folks, so everyone could see how the fundraising was contributing to the overall goal. They have different participation sort of types, questions to help funnel and help people kind of categorize themselves as sort of like how they work in participating, or their particular experiences they were bringing in to the event. Obviously, you want to make sure it's hyper critical. It was always critical, but now it's essential that obviously all your events are mobile friendly, so the participation centers and things like that you have for your folks that everyone can access. Look at how they're doing on their fundraising. Look at how they are communicating with their supporters and their donors, their network. So if your participant can't get in and easily manage their experience and be motivating their donors to give in a mobile responsive way, you're going to cut yourself off at the knees right at the beginning. And making sure that obviously your messaging and everything is pivoting towards helping folks stay engaged, again, over a longer period of time. It's, I think, is the most critical thing to think about. Retooling your messaging to really think about, how am I configuring this, like, touch points along the way. Not only are you participating, like, from your organization to your participants, but making sure your participants are able to message and motivate and communicate well with their supporter networks. Obviously, that's key to any sort of these peer-to-peer events, is how you're able to coach your participants to motivate their networks to participate in new ways too. So it's like this multi-tiered. So you have to really rethink your messaging a little bit and make sure that it's tuned in properly. And so the donor drive folks have an example with a recent client as well, the London Health Sciences Foundation Streamathon. We're gonna have Dan pop back in and kind of just speak a little bit to the experiences you had with that client.
Sure. Hey, thanks, Jen. So this is actually a great example, and one of the questions that we often get is, how fast can you pivot? How long does it take to actually get one of these events going? And of course they vary, but one thing I would say is a key to this, as you've kind of heard from Jen and Taylor, is make sure you've got, one, the right tools in place, and also the right partners you're working with that have the experience to help you move these events to a virtual environment. But London Health Sciences Foundation is a great example. This is London, Ontario, and it's their foundation that's supporting a network of hospitals in that area in Ontario. What they were doing was doing a virtual event, which was a 4-hour live stream. And it was to raise funds for COVID-19 response, so very, very timely. The idea behind it was to do some streaming via YouTube Live, where they were going to have local music station, a partner that was involved in this. They were going to have local musicians, DJs, a celebrity. They actually got Rachel McAdams to get involved in this, as well as some athletes, primarily NHL players. Their goal was $20,000 is what they wanted to get out of this particular event. And because of the way Donor Drive provides really for nonprofits an enterprise level charity streaming experience, London Health was able to execute on this in 30 days. So from beginning to end, from beginning to event, 30 days. Not only did they pass the $20,000 goal, they did it in 2 hours of that 4-hour event. In 4 hours, they reached a $50,000 fundraising amount, which was actually their stretch goal. And in the entire day, they actually raised $70,000. And doing this, they had 14,000, actually over 14,000 viewers that were part of this event. So it's a really good example of when you have the right tools and you've got the right partners who can help you execute on these events, the results can be phenomenal with that. So Jen, I'll throw that back to you. Thanks for this one.
Yeah. Great example, and a great example of how you can like really expand your ideas of what you can incorporate into a virtual event. Obviously, there's ways to bring in local folks, sponsors that would have otherwise, again, been, just sort of maybe speaking at your in-person event, that sort of thing. But even going beyond that, like a local musician. I mean, if you're able to get a celebrity, great. But the way to incorporate, like if you get this idea that it's going to be this virtual event, and it's going to be co-located, it's going to be geographically dispersed, getting like people at various locations to sort of be on, and then they can kind of do a little bit of a live stream, right? From, hey, here we are from Albuquerque, here we are in New Orleans, here we are, and like how they're participating in the event like that day. I think, again, it kind of helps bring that sense of community in, but certainly there's opportunities abound for how to expand and bring in a variety of content types for the day. And so kind of just, I think people get nervous about being like, oh, I don't want to just do live stream, but like, that's okay. But a little bit of live stream, a little bit of pre-recorded, a little bit of maybe songs, this like variety pack, just really get creative and think about how to expand the horizons that you might have been able to do in an in-person. All right, what are we up next? So those are some things about how you configure your event and think about some of the ways we've, seen people have success. I'm going to take it back to you, Taylor, to carry messaging forward.
All righty. Yeah, and just tapping onto that too, even when thinking about pre-recorded videos, you might have some that are longer in length, but you might also want to have some that are, ready to go that are short in length, where you can go and you can ask people who've been connected to one of your events before. Take a quick little 30-second video and send it your way, and then you can have sort of like a B-roll ready to go, right? And so I think that's an interesting way to think about how to have the right content when you show up. So Jen got into a lot of the, how do you set the right goals? How do you choose the right tools? What are all of the things to take into consideration when you're actually building the event and configuring it? Now, how do you get people to show up, right? Like what's the it factor there? First, let's get into messaging. And I love the topic of messaging and thinking about, how words really matter, and words plus the right visualization and how you're communicating around your virtual event really, really matter. So I'm going to get into some examples, but I want to talk about a couple of principles here real quick. One of my favorite authors is Brene Brown, and I love in her most recent book, Dare to Lead, she kind of really hit home on this concept of clear is kind, and she says it a lot. And I think when it comes to your messaging about your event and what you're doing and what you are asking people to do, clear is kind is just so relevant when we think about how we're communicating, right? So like, going back to Kevin Costner, so that we're not, traipsing through a field of, cornrows looking for people, right? If you can be really, really clear with what you're asking participants to do, why you're asking them to do it, and how you're asking them to do it, you're gonna get better traction with your event. Think about things and go back to your team and ask questions like, how is our event making a difference in their life, in the participants' life? how are we as an organization through this virtual experience leaning into our donors and our supporters and our volunteers' life aspirations, right? I always like to think about the fact that humans aspire to do big things, right? We all have our own personal life aspirations. And so when we think about creating those more human to human touch points in this digital world, we need to be asking ourselves these questions as it relates to how we message our event and how we fit in to their life's aspirations and doing the good work that they want to be a part of and making the world a better place. And, whatever it is your mission is centered around. I also think it's important to ask ourselves, like, is this fun? People like fun. They like to be inspired. They like fun. We're all home bored all the time right now. And so now is really the opportunity with your messaging to really hit home with why your event matters to the other person on the side of the screen. So I like to think about it as, if you don't give the market the story to talk about, they'll define your brand story for you. And why do I say that when we're talking about events? This is from a friend of mine, David Breyer. He authored a book called Brand Intervention. When you're thinking about messaging, I recommend you go read this book. It's really quick read and it's a really good one. But if you have an event and you launch it and you don't have clear messaging, then people will make assumptions about what the event is. And oftentimes they'll write it off. They'll move on to the next thing. Attention spans are short. And so when we think about our messaging about our virtual event and what it is and why you should show up and why you should raise money or why you should give, we need to be Captain Obvious sometimes, honestly. I think a lot of times we tend to lean towards jargon that maybe only our team understands, or we tend to just say very kind of big, unclear things like, our event will impact the world. It's like, okay, well, that's good. Tell me more, right? So when you think about your event messaging, again, like, be really, really obvious, either, about what your event is, why people should show up, why people should get involved. And that can be through the mixture of the right words and imagery and video and the combination of all of those things in messaging working together. Be really, really obvious. So I like this example. This is Be the Match. They're a client that we've been working with on their events for a long time. And I like just the clear, simple language that really ties into the mission of what they're trying to do, right? And what they're trying to do specifically with this event. Change a life, choose your goal. I like the language because it's very you-focused, right? When you think about engaging people and getting people to show up, again, you're fitting into their life, right? So choose your goal. You get to change your life. Come join us, the Champion Challenge. And then you click in there and you get to learn more about it. So I like the clear, nice, inspirational image along with the very simple, clear language and call to action. And this was right there on their homepage as one of the scrollers on their homepage. So good example. They also really, parlay this into their social media. And this one isn't, I came across this the other day on my Instagram feed, probably because I'd been on their website. And so they started targeting me, right? But when you think about how you think about messaging your event and targeting people, and Jen mentioned using channels like Instagram and Facebook and social, I'd been on their website, and then I'm later that evening on Instagram, and I see a sponsored ad from them because they're retargeting me, right? And so all of the things, all of the connection points start to come together, right? And they have really clear messaging about what they do and how, again, using the power to cure is inside you, using clear you language. So this didn't have to do with an event, but I thought it was a really great example of clear storytelling and clear messaging. And I took several screenshots here because there was actually one video that was scrolling through, the video of this girl who had 27 hospital visits, 4 surgeries, and she's one life that you can save, right? And the power to cure is inside you. Be the match, go join the registry. So when you're thinking about messaging around your event and what you do, look for, if you're not sure what to do, look for examples from other brands that you really admire, that maybe you see in your Instagram feed one day and think, how could I take that and wrap an idea like that around my work and around what we're doing at our organization or around what our event is. So, use those kind of nice, really short snippets with clear messaging across your channels and tie those messages together. A great example. Let's get into motivation. All right. So once you've got your messaging right, like you're sending people cool things that they're seeing on their phone screen, right? And then they're clicking and they're going and they're signing up. How do you keep them motivated over the long haul? Particularly if maybe it is a month-long campaign. Maybe you're taking something that you did before as an endurance event, right? Where there's typically in-person trainings and coaching and fundraising that happens kind of all around that, and you're thinking about how do you continue to motivate people to get out there and walk or run or bike or do whatever it is. I like to think about, motivation is really like staying top of mind, being a coach, being a mentor, doing those check-ins, right? And providing very, very clear paths to action. One of my thoughts about like goal setting, and one of the things I always go back to is when you have a big goal, right? Either as an organization or as an individual, it's 1,000 baby steps to get to that goal, right? To climb that ladder. And so you've got to think about your virtual event in that way too, with your participants and people you're engaging. Is there's that ongoing motivation and the 1,000 baby steps that you're helping to coach them along. Jen, would you add anything into that?
I think there's just a lot of that, like trying to help people kind of, like you said, keep top of mind. I think that's one of the most important things here is depending on the length of the engagement leading up to the event, and then keeping them engaged the day of. Just different check-ins, different points, being like almost try to, and then make it interactive even on the day of. Like, don't just sort of kind of have stuff coming at them. If you can, provide opportunities for people to, maybe there's a live streaming, coming next to you while you're in the event that day. You can get comments and questions back at you that day. But certainly kind of along leading up to that day, it's just keeping top of mind and staying motivational and tying back to that reason why they're doing it. Why, what's tying them personally to this, and what's motivating them to take time out of their day, take time out of their life to participate and raise money for you. It's a big one.
Exactly. And when you think about that motivation too, one thing I'll kind of add into that is like, this is where I think looking at your past event data that you have is really important, because you might want to, segment and coach people who have a specific connection to your cause slightly differently than people who maybe attended an event before because they were an avid runner and they liked going and doing 5Ks around, their area and things like that. And so there's different ways to motivate different people too. And that's where I think kind of looking at like, if you have information on like connection to the mission and stuff like that, look at that as you think about how you're motivating people, kind of looking at their past behavior. I like this example of MSAA. We work with them, and I signed up for their virtual event recently and have been doing it over the course of the last couple of months. Our team developed a team around this. We said, hey, this organization is they used to have, an in-person run. And now they said, hey, we're gonna let you choose your sport, and we're going to motivate you to, over the course of the next 3 months, raise this much money and either bike, walk, or swim this many miles. And I think I chose the running or walking, mostly walking route, if I'm being honest. And so I get emails now every Monday, my Monday motivation that always pertains to running, right? And I like that they're just super simple. It doesn't take me a long time to read them. It's just this nice reminder that I'm like, oh yeah, I signed up for that. I need to be tracking my miles and my run and go see where my fundraising is. And so it doesn't even have to be that complex or that over-engineered when you're thinking about, the coaching emails and the messaging and everything like that. Sometimes simple is really good and simple works. And I like now that I kind of come to expect this nice little reminder every Monday from from Jen, who's the run director, who sends me these quick little motivational pieces in my inbox. So that's another good example of just like having kind of that steady drumbeat of motivation. Another example is gamification. We've talked about gamification, and that can mean a lot of things. One of the ways that we've done this, again, with Be the Match on one of their programs, is to build out custom achievement badges and milestones. And so they allow people to go in and really kind of choose their own path to fundraising. And then once you've chosen that path and you sign up and you create your own fundraising page, you have all of these milestones to hit along the way. And those milestones, like, humans work off of incentives. And so having those milestones and those incentives along the way are a really good way to keep people engaged. And I know you can set custom milestones like this on Donor Drive. And so if you're looking at ways to like gamify and keep engaged, and gamification sometimes still sounds like a scary word. Like, what does that mean? This is an example of gamification. Simple is good, simple works, and simple incentives like this keep people going and motivated, kind of come back and tuned in to your event over a longer period of time. All right, so I know we've run through a lot. We want to leave plenty of room for questions here, and I think I've seen the little chat bubble chiming in a little bit. So just a really, really quick recap, because I know Jen and I have thrown a lot of information and a lot of ideas and things to think about, but just some high-level takeaways are, if you're thinking about a virtual event, or maybe you even have a virtual event already and you're looking for ways to make it more successful, things to think about are really, having clear outcomes and goals and a picture of what success looks like for you before you get started, right? Before you start building. So really planning out that event roadmap and walking through all of the steps that Jen kind of walked through on the roadmap. And then the next step is you've got to get the tools to do it, right? So technology is super powerful these days. There's a lot of different things you can do with technology. And so really choose the right tools. Like, once you define what you want your event to look like and what you want that whole virtual experience to be, then you can think about, okay, what tools can get me there, right? And then lastly, messaging and motivation. So once you build it, getting people to come back. And then lastly, I know Jen touched on this, is the measurement, right? Because we can build technology, we can put tools in place, and but if you don't have the right, things to measure, or you don't have the right picture of what you want to measure and what success looks like, then the tools will only do so much, right? So it's really a combination of all of these things working together that create that that connected experience, even in the digital world. Then you might have some things to chime in there on the end, and then we open it up.
I would just say, like,
Dan's got anything.
Yeah, we'll pivot to questions. I think the biggest takeaway here for me is also just the you can't measure or know the outcomes or the success of your event if you don't start from the beginning and say, what am I actually trying to do? Am I measuring just participation that day? Am I measuring outreach? Am I measuring fundraising? Am I measuring a little bit of all the above? Kind of really identifying the main objective for your event. If it's just show up, connect, expand my audience, that sort of stuff, great. That's a different sort of measurement than if you're actually really looking toward fundraising specifically. So I think it's really critical to not jump past this first part of really defining your outcomes, because then your measurement kind of can be off base, and then making sure that you configure the tools properly to get the right measurements to gauge the success of that event. Otherwise, you're just sort of like, you're scattershot, you're looking at a lot of different things, you're not quite sure. So make sure you kind of cover each of those points, specifically to sort of say, great, have I measured successfully? Is my event successful? How can I make sure I've geared things properly towards the right outcomes? Will help you know if you've been successful or not. So with that, I think we're going to, questions came in, right, Dan?
Yeah, so actually a very timely one that specifically asks around measurement. So this question came in: besides event revenue, what are the key ways you measure success of a virtual event versus an in-person event from an engagement and retention perspective? That's a great question.
That is a great question. Taylor, you got I look like you were about to jump in, so go for it.
Oh yeah. Well, I mean, I think there's honestly, like Jen and I were talking about this earlier this morning, and we've been thinking about this a lot too with clients that we work with. I think there's, there are things that are not that different actually, right? And from an in-person event to a virtual event in terms of measurement, you still want to track things like how many people are signing up, where are they on their fundraising goals, how many people are coming back and logging in maybe to their participant center and, sending emails to their friends and raising money and things like that. I think what's really critical in the virtual space in terms of measurement and engagement is around really looking at, are people staying tuned in, right? So once they sign up, like, are they showing up to the live feed, right? How many people are actually logging in? How many people are watching videos? If you have pre-recorded videos that you're posting and they're posted up in a way where you can track whether that's on YouTube or anything like that, or Facebook Live, and you can see how many people are watching, that's something that's important to understand if that, if people are showing up first off, and if they're staying engaged. So a lot of tools will allow you to track like watch time and how long people stayed on a video or how long people stayed in a feed. And I think those are things that are important to really like understand if it's resonating with people, if it's keeping them engaged. And that'll kind of tell you what you need to know too about doing it the next time if you want to do another virtual event. So those are some things that are maybe a little bit different in the virtual setting. You're kind of tracking how people show up online, right, as opposed to in person.
Well, your channels, I think, are the one. I think you can just go on, like, you need to make sure that you're thinking about those different engagement points, opportunities for engagement, and how, again, like you said, a lot of different tracking is going to be maybe slightly different. Again, some of the major goals you're measuring are fairly similar, but you have all these different social channels, hopefully, that you're engaging with and measuring that engagement along the way. So you're just tracking different things over a period of time. You still want to look at, are they communicating? Are they opening emails? Are they engaging with their supporters? All those same sort of metrics are there. But I think you have those different social channels and different sort of opportunities to track again, like, yes, are they watching the videos? Are they engaging with their content? And if they're not only are you thinking about how am I going to tweak it for my next event, like I said earlier, if you have a longer rollout period there, how can I tweak it mid-event stream? So you could go, well, that video didn't resonate. Let's try a different tack. So you can really look at it granularly, like each channel and each type of content, what medium is connecting most well, most effectively with people, and then pivot, maybe push some more of that forward if you can in that event cycle, not waiting to the next one. That's the beauty of digital, is you can make those changes much more quickly than you can, and you can't think about that a day up. It's like, it is what it is. You can't really make big changes that day, but you're able to do that in a digital space much more effectively. Is there another question?
All right, great. Thank you for that. Yes, we have, I guess, probably time for just one more. This is a timing question. So in your opinion, how many months are needed to prepare a solid virtual event? So I know we showed the London Health example, which was done in 30 days. That is not always necessarily the case, but Jen Taylor, about how many months do you think to prepare for a solid virtual event? And then also kind of a second part of this, how long would you suggest letting a virtual event run?
Mm-hmm. And I think there's a couple places there, like I would say, depending on the types and the amount and the variety of content you want to be able to show and, stream or have as a part of your day of, and which leads to kind of the second part of how long is your event actually happening in a virtual capacity. We've had people have like an hour, and we had another client that had like 30 hours. And we're like, okay, that's a much different amount of content you have to create. So obviously, if you're doing something that's a 30-hour marathon of events, you're going to want to back way up and think about how much content you're going to need to fill that space. Typically, people are doing like a couple hours, 3 to 4, maybe 5 hours or something like that. But still, you need to sort of back up accordingly and think, gosh, what is the content that's going to be needed to fill that space? So those two questions go together perfectly about how much time do you think you can engage folks, or how much time do you want to sort of put your team into that space and say, okay, back it up. If you're going to have a couple hours, 2 to 3 hours of an event, of live streaming, I would still give yourself like a good 3 months to think about scripting out the day, thinking about the content you're going to need to create ahead of time, and then making sure your team is really prepared. And please, please, please do dry runs of your event, before that day. So you make sure you've kind of thought through all the hiccups and all the hitches that happen when you transition from a live portion to a pre-recorded back to a live portion, et cetera. Script it out really, really, really specifically and do dry runs. But certainly give yourself maybe three months or so is probably a great idea. Again, you can cram it quicker. Ideally, you're giving yourself maybe the good 3-month window.
Perfect. Well, thank you, Jen and Taylor, for all of this information. I think it was wonderful. It was great. Well, one last thing that I'll say to everybody who's on. Remember, we did record this, so you will receive the recording afterwards. Please pass it along to others that were not able to attend. And certainly, if you have other questions, feel free to let your CSA at Donor Drive or folks at Firefly know. We're happy to answer any of those. And then please do remember to take the post-webinar survey. We really want your thoughts as we look at doing more of these. Thank you, everybody, for joining today. It was a pleasure to have this presentation for you. Bye-bye now.